This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, Writers Detective 5th Birthday, Police Firearms, and Protecting a Victim. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode 88 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality crime-related fiction. This week, we are celebrating the 5th birthday of Writers Detective, and I'm also answering your questions about police officers carrying their own firearms on duty and how a victim might get special protection. Big thank yous go out to Gold Shield patrons Deborah Dunbar from DeborahDunbar.com, Cece Jameson from CeCeJameson.com, Larry Keaton, Vicky Tharp of VickyTharp.com, Chris Ann, Larry Darter, Natalie Borelli of NatalieBorelli.com, Craig Kingsman of CraigKingsman.com, Lynn Vitale, Marco Carocari of MarcoCarocari.com, Robert Mendenhall, and Terry Swan for their support, along with my Silver Cufflink and Coffee Club patrons. You can find links to all of the Bureau's patrons in the show notes at writersdetective.com/88. Since COVID hit, I've been donating 100% of the money I receive through Patreon to Masks for Docs to provide PPE to those on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you have funds you'd like to donate, a box of N95 masks, or if you're a first responder or medical professional that's in need of PPE, go to masksfordocs.com to get connected with PPE right now. And to learn more about patronage through Patreon or to support the show and get access to my patron-only live streams for as little as $2 per month, go to writersdetective.com/Patreon. Patreon. This past week marks the 5th birthday of Writers Detective. And if you noticed that I didn't end up pushing out a podcast episode last week, that's because I was answering your questions in my very first Facebook Live inside our Writers Detective Q&A Facebook group instead. Thanks to those of you that were able to catch it live and throw out some questions for me to answer. I appreciate it. It would have been really weird for me to be in there all by myself. So I thought I would start out this week with a trip down memory lane back to the very beginning by reading my very first blog post, since fewer than 10 people probably read it back then. All right, here it goes. April 25th, 2015. Welcome and thanks. Last weekend, a screenwriter friend and his wife were joining us on a wine tasting weekend when the conversation turned to work. He asked for my take on a search and seizure issue related to how a character in his script would have actually had to deal with it. After a quick lesson on search warrants and privacy, I realized these types of questions are probably common amongst writers. This was my aha moment, and when I decided to launch this website. I should probably explain that I've been a cop for nearly 20 years, the last 16 as a detective. I've held a variety of assignments, from wearing a suit and tie working white-collar cases and then major crimes, sexual assault, robbery, and homicide, to dirtying up to some work covertly in narcotics, vice, and counterterrorism. I've worked alongside many of the federal acronym agencies, been assigned to task forces, and worked on countless dignitary protection details. In addition to my own adventures as a detective, these experiences have given me unparalleled insight into how these agents and agencies work. We in law enforcement are wary of folks calling themselves experts, often snarkily defining an expert as someone carrying a briefcase and from more than 50 miles away. I'm not claiming to be an expert in all things law enforcement. I'm simply here to augment your writer's toolbox by offering my own experiences and knowledge. I promise not to bullshit you. I will tell you if I don't know something, and I will work with you to find the answer. I want to thank the crime writing community on Twitter for welcoming me with open arms. There are quite a few great resources for crime writers out there already. I highly recommend following @Homicide School and @ThrillWritingFQ on Twitter. As a writer, you're already able to accomplish a huge amount of research on the internet, which is likely why you're on this page, just by reading articles applicable to your story scenario. While I certainly plan to add to your technical repository of cop knowledge, my real goal is to help you understand the human aspect of police work. Real-life police work is inherently conflict-driven, which is why it is so common and perfect for fiction. Conflict drives story. This conflict goes beyond good versus bad, right versus wrong, and we'll explore that together as we look at character, motivation, and the human truth behind police procedure. If you join the mailing list, I'll let you know when I update the blog and when I'll be speaking on these topics next. If I can be of any assistance with your writing, don't hesitate to contact me or comment here on the blog page. Adam, at LE Tech Advisor. That was my Twitter handle back then. Yeah, Law Enforcement Technical Advisor was the original super catchy domain name for my website. Good luck making that a username on any social media site. The title naming muse struck a few weeks later, and the much easier to say Writer's Detective rebrand was complete. Now, a lot has changed in the world in that 5 years. Okay, that is a major understatement. But it is a bit surreal to go back to that wine tasting weekend. Truth be told, that aha moment I mentioned in the original blog post actually happened the following day. Because number one, I was buzzed and obviously not in any kind of entrepreneurial problem-solving mindset at that point. And number two, we were actually a group of 4 couples, which I didn't mention, doing the wine tasting weekend. And my then fiance, now wife, and I were the only ones in the group not in the entertainment industry. Actually, there was one other gent in the group that wasn't. Graham is his name, but his fiance, Ray Seahorn, certainly is in the show business. You probably know Ray as the ponytailed attorney Kim Wexler, the co-star of Better Call Saul. And while a screenwriter friend named Josh and I were having the conversation that led to my delayed aha, I need to help writers moment, that was the exact same moment that Ray was recognized in public as the co-star of Better Call Saul, the then newly launched spin-off of Breaking Bad. And she was asked for her autograph for the very first time. And naturally, that called for another round of clinking our wine glasses together in celebration. It was a cool moment to witness, for sure. But I mention it now because it probably played a subconscious role in believing that I actually could one day do some technical advising in Hollywood. And you know what? I've checked that off my bucket list many times over since then. And I don't mean that to sound like a brag or a name drop or that something magical happened. I guess my point's just that you shouldn't underestimate the effect that others have on your way of thinking about how you can accomplish things. When you see other people succeeding in the arena that you're interested in, it all seems way more possible than it does when you feel all alone with your goals and your dreams. If you surround yourself with negative people, that absolutely 100% rubs off on you, no matter how much you try to not let it or to ignore it. But when you spend time with people that accomplish the kinds of things you dream about doing, that has an effect too. Suddenly, that climb up the ragged mountain doesn't seem quite so steep because all of a sudden, a trail has become visible to you, especially when you can see someone on the trail ahead. That's why it's so important for you to find your tribe, to find the people that will support the vision you have for where you want to be in the next 5 years. So 5 years later, I'm still here to help you. And 5 years from now, I better be retired. And if all goes to plan, still helping you as my full-time retirement gig. I just want to say thank you for the support. And whether you've been here since my cringeworthy law enforcement technical advisor days, or you just found the Writer's Detective Bureau this week, thank you for sharing your stories with the world, and welcome to the Bureau. Author Marty Knox asked the following question, and you can find her work at martyknoxblackmesa.blogspot.com, and that's Knox spelled like Fort Knox. So Marty asks, do law officers use their own weapons while on duty? Are they allowed to buy and use their own weapons, or do they have to use the standard issue? What about in a small rural town where budgets are tight, or even big cities? Would an officer equip themselves with the gear the town couldn't or wouldn't buy? Great question, Marty. This is one of those it depends on the agency answers. First, yes, There are agencies that allow their officers to buy their own weapons to carry on duty. But it's been my experience that the larger the police agency, the less likely that department allows their officers to carry their own firearms. The smaller the agency, the more likely that is a possibility. Now, just because an agency allows their officers to carry their own weapons does not mean they can carry anything they can find. The department will have a firearms policy that requires certain conditions to be met before the officer can carry it. Those policy requirements usually require that the firearm be made by a reputable manufacturer, that it be of a certain caliber or calibers. Your department isn't going to allow you to carry a little .22 as your main duty weapon, and that the weapon carries a minimum number of rounds. So, like I just said, there's no way a department would let a uniformed officer go out handling calls carrying a James Bond-style Walther PPK, which affords the gun toter 7 whole rounds of a .380 caliber. Now, for those listeners that aren't familiar with guns, that isn't very many bullets, and those bullets don't have much stopping power in comparison to the firearms that cops normally carry while in uniform. Carrying a concealed weapon while off duty is a totally different conversation for a whole other podcast episode. But while we're on the topic, this is actually something I talked about briefly during last week's Facebook Live, and it's worth explaining here again, albeit rather briefly. I know many of my listeners, especially those abroad, have never held or fired a handgun before. So a lot of this is a bit of a mystery, and it can seem daunting to ask such basic questions for online fear of, well, internet trolls, really. I'm not a huge gun guy. I mean, I carry them and I own them, and I'm a pretty good shot, but I'm not a gun nerd. So I don't really cover them much here on the podcast because, like I just talked about from that blog post, I'm here for the human aspect of things. But as an author, it's worth knowing a few basic things about guns and ammunition if you're going to write in this genre. So for starters, I've already mentioned a little .22, and that James Bond gun was a Walther PPK, which is a .380. Now, when I throw out those numbers, 22 or 380, there's actually a decimal point in front of that number, and that's what we call the caliber. So it is .22 and .380 because that's the diameter of the round. It is .22 inches or .380 inches. Make sense? But you might be asking yourself, what about 9mm? Well, now we're going metric. It's, you guessed it, 9 millimeters in diameter, right? But here's the thing. The diameter is not the only indicator of size and type for a round. So what we call them often has an agreed upon meaning. So for instance, the .380 round, which is .38 inches in diameter, is designed to be fired from a small semi-automatic pistol like Bond's Walther PPK. But a .38 special round, which is also .38 inches in diameter, has a longer shell and is designed to be fired from a .38 special revolver, like what Popeye Doyle carried on his ankle in The French Connection. Okay, to stave off the gun nerds, the .38 special gets its number from the diameter of the shell, which is actually .379 inches, and not from the diameter of the bullet. Any guess as to the diameter of the bullet itself on the .38 special? I'm sure you've heard this number before. Yep. The bullet's diameter on a .38 special round is actually .357, the same diameter as the .357 Magnum round. But a .38 special round is different from a .357 Magnum round. See how confusing this gets so quickly? The whole point in bringing this up is to give you an idea of what the numbers mean when we're talking about ammunition. So to get back to Marty's original question, a smaller rural agency may allow or even require their officers to buy their own firearms, as long as what they're carrying on duty meets the department's policy. So if you want your character to carry something realistic and modern, you can't go wrong with a 9mm, a .40 caliber, or a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun made by well-known and reputable manufacturers like Smith & Wesson, Sig Sauer, Glock, Beretta, H&K, or even the good old Colt 1911, which refers to the year it was invented, not the size of the round it fires. So Marty, I would pick a department that you're loosely basing your story off of and see if you can spot the brands or models that they carry in real life when looking at their social media photos. A lot of times the agency will have a department issue firearm, like a make and a model, like a Beretta 92 or a SIG P226, but then allow officers to carry something else in lieu of what the department issues, assuming it's within policy, meaning that they're inspected and approved by the department's armorer and that the officer qualifies with it at the range. If the officer buys a new gun, he can't just start wearing it on duty without qualifying with it at the range first. So thanks so much for your question, Marty, and thank you for being a supporter, a patron on Patreon. You can find Marty's work at martyknoxblackmesa.blogspot.com. This week's next question comes from screenwriter Ryan Elder. Ryan writes, I'm writing a crime thriller screenplay where a woman is rescued from a kidnapping. One of the kidnappers is arrested in the process and the others get away. The police do not know who they are, but they're trying to prepare a case against the arrested suspect, hoping to compel him to cut a deal and rat out the others. During this, the kidnapped victim is afraid that the other kidnappers may come after her because she may know too much and is a witness now. When I asked police about this before, they said that the police do not have the resources to offer all-around protection to witnesses in cases. I then thought this may make the story more interesting, because now she has to figure out how to protect herself or get some protection on her own. For my story, the kidnapped victim character wants the cop who rescued her to watch and protect her for the night specifically. She trusts him more because he found her and rescued her. I want her and him to be alone for a good portion of the story, with no other police around. So if she wants protection, she will have to do something to compel him to watch over her for the night, even though he's not assigned to do so. I thought perhaps she could stage a break-in at her house to compel him, but the thought that by doing so, it would just grab attention from other police and investigators. So she would have to find a way to compel him to watch her without attracting the attention of other police. Is there a way she could do this? I love this question, Ryan, because your attempt to find the answer is exactly what your character is going through. Right now, she's saying to herself, should I stage a break-in, or will that just bring me more trouble and more cops? Cut to victim checking Google on her phone. Close-up of her typing in how to get police protection for the night, returning with meaningless results like private security ads and the Wikipedia page for the Federal Witness Protection Program. I think this is how you could show the panic that she's going through as it leads up to the frustration of not knowing how to compel him and the anxiety of not knowing what to do next, which would culminate in, out of sheer desperation, simply asking him. And the cop agrees because he sees how terrified she is and because it's the right thing to do, not because he's compelled to. It's real. It shows the human connection and the emotional side of these things. And besides, if she stages a break-in and files a false police report, well, first of all, a break-in is far less severe than a kidnapping. So if she was already kidnapped and she's not getting protection, I don't think a break-in's going to do anything else. But filing a false police report, in that case, the easiest way to resolve this whole problem, at least from the cop's point of view at that point, especially knowing that it's all because she's afraid of being kidnapped again tonight, would be to lock her up in jail for the night because of the false police report. I mean, I'm sure that wouldn't be the outcome nor the plot twist you're looking for. And I know, he wouldn't have charges filed against her or anything, but he'd certainly have the probable cause to do so to get her booked, and it would be the safest place for her for the night. So go the emotional route of human-to-human connection, even if it's a ruse on her part to con him into doing it. Your audience will connect with her over it because they'd probably do the same thing, and it's more believable than the cop being forced into it out of some sort of procedure. So thanks for the question, Ryan. I hope this helps. Thank you so much for listening this week. This show is powered by your questions, so send them to me by going to writersdetective.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week. Stay healthy and write well.